Okay, so now we're going on a tour of the layout. I guess we're starting at a visible staging area. So what do we have here?
Well, what I call it is it's Illinois Central, the Central Station in Chicago.
Right.
The Michigan Central, when it got going in the 1850s, this was its only access to Chicago.
Right.
So they continued to have their passenger trains come out of Illinois Central Station.
Mm-hmm.
The New York Central Station was LaSalle Street, which was completely different in downtown Chicago.
Right.
So this is my rendition of that particular station. It's reasonably competent in the sense that it does evoke their central station.
How many tracks are here?
Well, here there's 11 or 12, I guess.
Okay.
And
so when trains come in here and terminate and the locomotives are on the front end, you can have them escape. You've got an interesting mechanism here. Eh?
So this really makes it possible.
Yeah.
Because, the engine comes off and onto here.
Right.
It's also possible to use steam engines because
you can turn them as well. Eh?
This was a friend that built this for me, and it's wonderful. It works particularly great on freight trains in this area because freight train, it doesn't matter where the cars are, it's a freight train.
Right.
Whereas with passenger trains, I do need to take them out, bring them around the loop in Detroit, and then back them in preparation for their next thing.
Yes.
Typically, this is 12 hours apart in the schedule. So, as I say, I do about 6 hours at a time.
Mm-hmm.
So I have lots of time simply to take them out and bring them around. But it certainly allows the hostler to get the engines off and to take them to the refueling facility and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's typical big city with the backdrop and a lot of tracks. There's 5 tracks that are completely passenger, and then there's the other 6 are there's one caboose track kind of thing, but they're typically for the freight trains, the through freight trains that are coming in.
Great.
So
that's that. Let's move on and see what else there is out here. Okay, so after we've left Chicago, we kind of went through a wall, and now we're in another vignette scene.
This is Livernois Yard, which is the engine facility and the freight yard for the New York Central in Detroit.
Okay.
And there's also Rougemere Yard, which is the C&O main yard in Detroit. And they're very close together, so I've combined the two and made it that. So you will see New York Central engines in here. You'll see CPR engines, passenger engines that came through from Detroit. There's some RDCs in the back there, Chris, that are CPR.
Okay.
So they're simply out of the way of the passenger station until they're needed, and then they come in and get ready to go on to Toronto.
Right.
You saw the RDC in the other area, that also comes through. So these are, this is the West Detroit signal tower here, and it's pretty typical of a big yard, but it's mainly staging. The hostler, in fact, does all of the changes to the caboose, changes the engines, and prepares the trains in staging for when they come in and when they leave. So it's a pretty busy job. He also helps the Detroit switcher as well, the station master as well, when there's a lot of additional work in Detroit. So.
All right, so we've come through another wall.
Yeah, we come through the wall in the back corner there.
Yeah.
What I've depicted here is the big city of downtown Detroit, which was about 2 miles from the station. The New York Central expected downtown to grow out to its station, which it never did.
Right.
So that's, you know, there's the coach yard here and the passenger car repair facility there. There's a turnaround loop here to allow me to turn trains and to allow the switcher to pull cars off and bring them around and put them into the coach yard and into the various industries that are here.
This is quite a massive station that you've made. It's all scratch built, I take it.
Yes.
Now here's a shot of the coach yard, and I'm swinging around just to show it from the other angle of this humongous passenger terminal course in Detroit. And I guess from there it goes into the wall on the other side. Now, can you tell me a little bit more about this this station that you built?
Well, it was my friend Jack Scott. His dad was an architect.
Yeah.
So we learned how to do these with plexiglass, and you know, it's simply strips of colored cardboard put on top of plexiglass. And,
yes.
So it was fairly easy to make, but it took a lot of thinking about how to do it.
Right.
Over the years, I've made them shorter and shorter because I started out about another 1.5 feet down the track that way and another 1.5 feet track down the other way.
Guess it makes it easier for uncoupling and that sort of thing.
It sure does.
It's hard to get your fingers inside there.
The poor trains would they'd disappear inside the station here, and they think, well, okay, I know there's one in there somewhere.
You got quite an elaborate panel here, so all your turnouts are electrically thrown.
This is what's called a diode matrix.
Okay.
So when I press track 7,
yeah, everything throws.
That throws every switch at that end. When I throw track 5, that throws every track at that end. So that was quite complex. It's worked like a charm for 10-12 years, and no problems or anything else. This is the REA right here.
Okay.
The station was actually, it's hollow underneath the station. It wasn't, so the REA and the baggage rooms and everything else is all underneath the station. In
the prototype, yeah.
In the prototype.
So you had to move it to the front.
No, this is where the New York Central had it.
Oh, okay.
So it was the REA.
I got you here. Yeah, I see.
So that's why that's.
So it's underground there.
It's underground.
Yeah. Oh, that's
and then what would happen, you know, you'll see in Buffalo where you're going up and over the tracks. This one you went underneath the tracks to get into the station proper.
I see.
So so then one of the tracks here is the mail.
Right.
Was used as the mail track. They actually had elevators that would go down and into the underground part of it. This end of the depicts the more industrial parts of Detroit.
Right.
It was, you know, one of the 1 or 2 largest industrial areas in the world. So there was a lot of heavy industry. It's pretty well all disappeared now in Detroit. I brought a little bit of it forward, but even 10 blocks from the station here, there was some heavy industry. So it was partly residential and partly industry and light industry in the area. So as we come through to the left here, this is the American side of the tunnel. I don't know if you can get that or not. But
oh, sure. I'll just zoom over here and have a look at it.
And there's also some lights there you can see.
Yeah.
And you can see them changing color.
Yes.
So the station master, if it's red on this side, then it's green on the other side. That's how he controls when the trains come into Detroit.
Ah, okay.
So he has total control. It's just a hand throw. But
well, that's good though.
So
because I mean the operator has to be ready, to receive a train and have his switches set up.
Yep.
Perfect.
Yep. So the Detroit fellow, he controls all the switches. The engineer doesn't have to worry about, because this is pretty complex trackage.
Yes.
And one of the things I learned early on was that the engineer couldn't do it reliably.
Okay, Okay, so now let's move to Canada. Alright, so we've come through the tunnel, guessing into Canada, right?
Yes.
So what do we have here?
Well, this is Windsor, Ontario.
Right?
And, you know, this is a good rendition of the tunnel entrance. I had to modify it a bit, but then we have the freight house. This is just under your hand there.
Mm-hmm.
And the station painted on the wall there. That's the Windsor station. That was done by a young friend of my son's when he was about 16 years old or thereabouts.
Gosh, that's very effective.
He did a great job. The tunnel was electrified.
Okay.
I chose an era when it had been ventilated and diesels coming through it.
Right.
No, freight trains were essentially, you know, the steam engines couldn't go through the tunnel.
Right.
So everything stopped in Detroit, everything stopped in Windsor.
And they put new power on.
They put electricals on and dragged them over to Windsor, and conversely the other direction.
Huh.
The Windsor yard there was actually 5 distinct yards.
Right.
It was 7 miles long, complete you know, facilities with roundhouses and car repair and all of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I could not model that. So I do have one area here that I call Windsor Yard.
Yes.
In the background is the massive icing track and icing facility. The main reason for this was, as I said, all of this produce and frozen meats and all of this was coming through from Chicago to Detroit and then going through Canada. Well, this was the first natural place for it to stop and get re-iced coming out of Chicago, because it would take time to get across the, you know, through the tunnel, and so this was, I think, the biggest icing facility on the New York Central. So it's a pretty massive thing. They could do a train of 80 cars in half an hour.
Amazing.
So they had 4 tracks. Each track would handle 20 cars.
This is a pretty important tower here, I guess, as well, in terms of the operation,
Yes.
I see there's also a switching panel that goes along at the same spot.
Yep, tower number 4, always open, day and night. It was the entrance to the yards, the Windsor yards.
And then now I guess you're proceeding out into the fast track in the country.
Yep.
Okay, so after they've left the tower and you're moving into the countryside, into Canada, a couple of interesting things happen. Can you describe what happens to the next part of the layout here?
Well, you know, the rest of it is the passenger trains are going through.
Yeah.
This is the freight side of the business here, as was Windsor Yard, obviously.
Yeah.
This is the small town of Essex on the main line. Why I've done that was there was a big chemical plant, Brunner Mond, which made a chemical called soda ash, which is used in a lot of industrial processes and in making glass and that kind of thing. So when I was in the chemical branch in the Government of Canada, that was one of my customers, was Brunner Mond. It was Allied Chemical at that stage. So these cars here are essentially heading for, you know, 20 miles down the branch.
Right.
And so they had Calvert distilleries. They had you know, big. There was a bread manufacturer. Number of industries down this particular.
So the way you model that basically is you have the track off the main.
Yes.
And the cars go into all those industries are dropped into that track.
That's it. Exactly.
Perfect.
It's like a staging track,
Yeah.
but not quite.
Yeah, but it still gives you a lot of operating potential in terms of understanding how the real railroad worked at that time.
It's really like an interchange track.
Yeah.
Anything can go in and anything can come out. So, and then we had, well, sorry,
Yeah.
This particular area here
In the foreground, yeah.
In the foreground is the town of Leamington.
Right.
The Chesapeake and Ohio came out of Windsor and came through Leamington. The New York Central had a branch off the main line, which we'll see a little bit later, and so it's down the other end of the thing here. The main line here is Comber. There were a few interesting products there. This is a flour manufacturer here, and a kind of a gravel facility, and then a team track, an interchange track at the back, and then down the other end is the beginning of Heinz facility. Heinz in Leamington was the biggest food processing facility in the British Empire at one stage. It just came out in the paper about 2 weeks ago that Heinz was closing down their Canadian operations.
Yeah, I heard that.
So there's about 1,000 people still working there that do tomato and a lot of food processing. So this is the New York Central end of Leamington. It's a grain elevator. This is the Heinz pickle plant. So there's a lot of pickles there. This is the local switcher, so he does the industries. This will be the power plant. Of course, a food processor needs lots and lots and lots of hot water, so he needs a power plant there to light and to heat the water. The area was also heavy duty in tobacco.
Right.
So this is not a tobacco drying, but a tobacco storage. After they were dried in their local area, it was brought in here. So about a car or two every day would head down to the cigarette manufacturers out of this kind of facility in Leamington. So I'll just move this out of the way a bit here. In the background here is the Heinz made vinegar in there. So this is their vinegar
manufacturing and
storage
yeah.
and loading. I've got some specific vinegar cars that are wood.
Right.
Because the vinegar, of course, is acidic.
Yeah.
So that's where those get loaded.
It's kind of an interesting plant. I mean, it gives you lots of opportunity to use your creativity. I see you using pipes and they normally use for plumbing, and you're going to build them into tanks.
Yep, yeah, these will all be the tanks here.
Wonderful.
So this is the Heinz shipping and receiving by train, and also, of course, develop more and more shipping and receiving by truck.
So you got a few steamers.
Well, it was such a decrepit branch line at the end that they couldn't run heavy diesels on. So this 280, a small 280, ran right to the end of steam in Canada, which was mid-56.
Now I see at this point too the railroad goes through the wall, and you've got quite a nice catenary style of lighting system here, and quite a few different tracks going through. This leads into the helix. So in a way, I guess this is where the railroad splits off in a number of different places.
Yeah. Well, the one at the back is the Leamington branch. So the Leamington branch comes out of Comber, goes all the way around, and this is where it comes out.
Okay, so it comes in a loop and through the wall.
Yes.
Okay, and that's built into your helix as well. Is that correct?
Yeah. So there's a Y here to allow
trains to reverse.
And
okay, and then the other set of lights, the next set in from the wall,
is the green is for the CPR, which means essentially the CPR, the switch on the helix that the CPR uses to get off the helix is thrown for the CPR.
Okay.
So he's got a through. The New York Central, being the red over the green, it's thrown against him. He
Right.
doesn't want to go that way.
Right.
So when I change the switch,
Yeah.
then these lights change.
Okay, so they're controlling a turnout depending on which railroad that is coming off the helix, whether it's the New York Central or the CP.
Yeah. What I found with all of this variability, the fellows, if they do it themselves,
Right.
always ended up in the
wrong place. Yeah.
And I'm saying, what? You're New York Central. What are you doing on the CPR tracks? Oh, well, I just threw a switch.
Yeah.
So the
Let me explain
dispatcher.
things.
So the dispatcher essentially controls the routing
Yeah.
through the helix, so that
So really, all trains should pretty much. You're aware of who's on the road, and you throw the turnout for them,
yes,
unless otherwise occupied.
yes, exactly.
Excellent.